Hey everyone, this is part 2 of our discussion with Bryan Caplan. It picks up right where we left off in part 1. Welcome back. There's this study that came out recently in the Journal of Public Economics, which I'm sure you've heard about.
Oh yeah.
Arteaga, I believe is how you pronounce their name. It's called The Effect of Human Capital on Earnings. And so just to summarize briefly, a school in Columbia knocked down some of the classes, the advanced coursework for a couple of degrees. Mm-hmm. It looked like everybody came in the same, so the signal was still strong enough. But lo and behold, in the years following this sort of reduction in the coursework, which would have denigrated the human capital component of the courses, or of the course of study, but not the signal, and she finds that the employability of students went down, and so did their wages. Mm-hmm. Now this is sort of runs right into your argument. How do you work with that, and what do you think about it? And is it sort of a partial explanation? How does it refine your argument?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I say is, first of all, it seems like this is a very high quality paper, very careful, and I have no fundamental complaint with exactly what was done. The main question that occurs to me is this. If it came out the other way, would people then say, well, this is the paper that shows that Bryan has the whole truth? I don't think so. I think if it came out the other way, people would say, well, it's a study based upon one school in Columbia for 2 majors, and it just tells us a little bit, it tells us a lot about that school and those majors, but doesn't tell us very much about the education system in general. Right. And that is my view. Now, if you look at the precise classes that were cut, it's very remarkable that one of the things that got cut was the econometrics, basically the statistical training.
Yeah, it was the advanced courses that got cut.
And so they also cut a class of Marxist economics, if I remember correctly.
That's
so
right.
I doubt that mattered to the employers.
Right.
But they cut one of the most vocational classes, and in fact, so like, as the paper was described to me, some of the employers said, well, we weren't happy that they didn't know these statistics anymore. But remember, I never said that all the education school is signaling. I'm totally open-minded about, is this particular thing signaling or human capital? What's the breakdown? But at the same time, what I try to do in the book is to bring together all the evidence simultaneously between 2 covers and say, what is a reasonable breakdown overall, even though, so I think that statistics classes are, especially in the modern big data economy, I think that probably does have a much bigger relevance to the job. Well, even there, it is striking how much of the statistics classes are pure theory and how little of it is actually get in front of a computer and work with some data.
Indeed. Yeah, more people should learn stata, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so let me ask a different question to kind of push back. There's, in my field of education, we have lots of studies that look at teacher value added, right? Mm-hmm. So teacher value added is how much difference did this teacher make to students' learning by controlling when they came in, and some teachers are much better and others are less. And, Raj Chetty has also found that these value added effects almost unbelievably last way out into economic outcomes as adults. So how does that square with this, that it's all signaling when it looks like we've actually got pretty clear signals of value, well, they call it value added.
Yeah, so the way that Raj Chetty does the work, if you look at it closely, is he gets a big payoff for teachers by going and multiplying 30 kids per class times a 40-year career.
That's right.
So the actual change on individual kid of their earnings is actually, of getting a good versus bad teacher, is quite small. And I'd say it's totally within the realm of what I'm talking about. In the book I talk about how some majors pay more than others, some kinds of courses pay more than others. And again, part of that is probably that some majors and courses actually are more skill-based and less signally. And I'm perfectly willing to say that some teachers actually are pouring more skill into kids. What's weird about a lot of this value-added work is very often they find that the actual cognitive skills fade out in a couple years, but the earnings don't.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing that I think really should make us scratch our heads and say, what in the world is going on? So you get a good teacher, they teach you more, and then a few years later you've forgotten it, but then 15 years later you get a better job. That seems kind of odd. And as for what's going on, to my mind, the best story is that when you get a good teacher, they actually are helping train you to game the system, right? So maybe you get a good teacher.
That's a cynical take.
Yes, you get a good teacher, and they get you all. They teach you better. You don't keep the actual learning, but they do help push you up into the more college motivated track, and then you wind up getting getting more years of education. You wind up so
let me try an alternative. No, go ahead. Finish.
Yep. So again, so at least my tentative explanation for these study results is that having a good teacher is a lot like going to an SAT prep class. It isn't really improving you in any fundamental way, but it does give you a leg up in the rat race.
Sure. So I understand that, but let me offer another interpretation and see how you push back on it. So what if we have some regression or loss over time because sort of the specifics that would yield to a higher test score that leads to higher retention. In other words, there's 1,000 details, and originally you remembered 900 of them, and then down the line you could only remember 700 of them. But maybe there's some sort of more general benefit to education that is valued in the labor market, that is valued further down the line, that is transmitted but not reflected in those narrow tests that are focused more on, these discrete particles of education. Is that possible or unlikely?
It's possible but unlikely.
Okay.
So there's a whole field called educational psychology where they try to go and measure the subtler or indirect effects of learning and education. And in general, even though the researchers want to find the results that there are lots of subtle and indirect benefits of education, they have a lot of trouble actually doing it. Like often they'll work on it for 20 or 30 years. They think they're going to finally find the subtle effects, and then at the end they're shell-shocked and they say, I just don't see them. I wish they were there. Again, it's just, so it is a very striking result. And again, like when academics who want to find a result can't find it, that's the kind of research that I take very seriously. Seems like learning, turns out to be highly specific. And again, the way that you train someone to be good at something is to train them at that exact task or related tasks, rather than just go and give them general education. Right. Especially since the tests that these kids are usually be given are not like tests of like the 5 different kinds of clouds or something like that. Right. Normally these are literacy and numeracy tests.
Right.
So if the improvement that you get in literacy and numeracy from a good teacher, if that goes away, then there's still something else that, some invisible thing. Again, of course, there's this general idea of teaching people how to think. Again, when people actually try to measure the ability to teach people how to think, they're usually very disappointed. It's really hard to teach people how to think. Much easier to actually teach them what to think. Right. And again, like when people often say, well, the problem with our education system is we're pouring tons of facts into them, but we're not teaching real thinking skills. And my response is, you're an optimist. I think it would be a huge improvement if we actually taught them a lot of facts. We don't seem to even be able to do that.
Well, let's take another couple of angles that I think are really interesting. So you make some observations in the book about this criticism that colleges are far too left, but we see what signaling might predict, not what human capital theory might predict about that. And we also have some other things that are interesting that I just want to name off and let you kind of talk about. Health effects of education. Civic engagement. These are effects of education that, when I've taught classes before, I've run through these bivariate correlations and said, see, it's better. Can you just comment on some of those things and how signaling explains them?
Sure. So just starting with the left-wing orientation of teachers and especially professors.
Right. Have you found that to be the case?
Certainly at higher education, it's overwhelmingly true. And again, especially for professors that you would be most concerned about. So basically, professors in the social sciences and humanities, very politically far left. And so in terms of just being concerned, I can see why people would be concerned that there'd be a lot of left-wing brainwashing going on in college. And then if you look at K through 12 teachers, it's not as lopsided, but still pretty pronounced. Right. But what I say is you go and look at the data, what you see is there's only a very slight tendency for people with more years of education to be more liberal, actually. Now, it's easy to think, well, that can't be true because all my professors are so liberal and they have lots of education. Yeah, but most well-educated people aren't professors.
Right.
There's a lot of well-educated people who go to school and then they leave and they do something else and then we don't really talk about them anymore because they're not really politically in our eye anymore.
Right.
So now again, you might look at this and say, see, even what horrible false accusations to make against left-wing teachers to claim they're trying to brainwash their students.
Sure.
They're actually just doing a good job and trying to give them an education and putting their own biases aside. I've been in school too long to believe this story. I see tons of evidence of bias in the classroom.
Right.
But What I think is really going on is that most teachers and professors just aren't very persuasive. They're so boring.
They're just not very effective.
They're not good propagandists. I mean, in college, half the kids don't show up to class anyway.
Sure.
So the fact that we don't see very much brainwashing going on, I think it's something that should really make everyone sleep easier.
Right.
Because it means that people that feel like they're getting accused of brainwashing, really they at least aren't accomplishing very much. And the people who feel like I can't send my kid to college, they'll get brainwashed by the left. Like, look, just
you don't need to worry.
Yeah, calm down. Not that much is happening.
Gotcha. So health effects.
Yeah, health effects. So,
Briefly.
Yes.
Health effects.
Yes. So this
Got to
is
be a different explanation than the
so,
last
so in my whole life, I have never heard someone say you need to stay in school so you live longer.
Right.
And yet there is a large body of researchers that go and try to measure how much longer will you live and how much healthier will you feel.
Lower weight, lower risk of heart disease, all kinds of good stuff.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird because this is the only real wonks would ever bring this argument up, but there is a lot of evidence saying that it's true. However, I think I spent at least a full month of my life just reading this research to see what I would say about it. And in the end, there's a few things that I'd say. First of all, if you go and make a bunch of reasonable adjustments, then a lot of the effect does go away. So again, you want to adjust for, first of all, you just want to adjust for income.
Right.
Right. So you can use money to buy health. So, and the fact that the more educated people have more money, well, they could have had more money in a lot of different ways. So
if you control for selection.
Yes, control. Yeah, you want to control for a bunch of different kinds of selection,
right.
or you would also just say, look, it's really double counting to say that education raises income raises health, and then to give that credit for education. It would be like saying education is great because it gives you a better car. Well, it's like, look, we already counted that when we were adding up the financial payoff, so we shouldn't count it a second time. The other thing, though, is that a lot of these health benefits come from lifestyle changes.
Right.
And essentially more educated people have a more cautious and abstemious lifestyle.
And so do their peers.
Yes, and their peers.
Right.
And so when you look at that, you say, well, isn't that great? And I say, well, is it great? So there's a lot of things that you could actually do to improve your health that I would highly recommend you not do.
Right.
Because they are horrible things and you'd be giving up so much. Like, for example, if you were just celibate your entire life, you cut out a great many risks.
That's you.
Yes,
but you don't recommend it.
Yeah, I don't recommend it.
Right?
Just imagine that education were basically monastic education, where it turned people celibate. Would we then say this is a great health benefit? It's like it's a health benefit that anyone can access at any time.
Indeed.
It's a horrible cost.
So the book is really provocative. It's really interesting. I encourage folks to read it because there's far more than we can cover here. What do you want people to do? If they buy your argument, what do you want them to do?
So there's two things that I push for.
All right.
So the first thing is cutting education spending, educational austerity. I say that the fundamental cause of credential inflation, the fundamental reason why you need so much education to get a halfway decent job in America is because there's so much access to education. There's so many people who have it. The degrees have proliferated beyond all measure. And as a result, you now need a lot to impress employers. I say that if there were less access to education, we would have credential deflation. We could move back to the way that the economy worked in the 60s or 50s, where you could get a very good job right out of high school.
So you're not for free college?
I am very much against free college. I say that this whole mentality is the problem.
Sure.
I say so I actually have a section called "The Hidden Wonder of High Tuition and Student Debt,"
right.
Which is, of course, any one individual would like to have free tuition.
Right.
But if everyone had free tuition, this would mean there'd be even more college degrees out there, and the degree would mean even less.
Right.
Again, when I say this, people get so freaked out because they're thinking about what about one poor kid who can't afford to go. And I'm saying, look, that's not the right thought experiment. The right thought experiment is, what if a ton of people couldn't afford to go anymore?
Right.
And I say, Len, a lot of people couldn't afford it, but you wouldn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
So imagine a world where you couldn't afford college, but also you could get a good job without college.
Right.
That seems like a much better world for most people than the world that we're in right now.
All right, so education austerity, what else?
And the other thing is vocational education, which I think is greatly undervalued. Partly it's undervalued just for individuals because while college pays well for people who are good students, it doesn't pay well for people who are not good students especially because they have such slim odds of finishing.
Yes.
So I say, there's a lot of evidence that for people that just don't like school, and people always say, oh, if they just have the right teacher. No, there's a lot of people that the best teacher in the world would not make U.S. history interesting to them. It's not a problem with the teacher. It's a problem with the person doesn't like this kind of thing at all.
So you're totally okay if a lot fewer people take U.S. history.
Yes.
No problem.
Yes. Especially just because there's so little evidence that adults retain more than a token amount of knowledge. So meaning, so if most of American adults knew a lot of history, and then I said, well, you don't use it, and someone said, yeah, well, it makes them better voters, I'd be nervous. But it's not true that most adults know a lot of history. In fact,
or that they vote.
Yes. A lot more people vote than who have a decent understanding of history or civics. Right? Partly because we have the whole mentality of it doesn't matter how you vote, just vote.
Right.
Rather than what I say is a sensible mentality of if you understand what's going on, then please do participate because you improve things. Right. If you have no idea what's going on, then you're just muddying the waters. But that is going to
let me push it to one last thing that I think is that is controversial. But I think you have another book about that. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I do. Yes, Myth of the Rational Voter.
We'll have to talk about the Myth of the Rational Voter another time. But interesting question here, as sort of that I didn't see in the book. What about micro-credentials? This is a talk about, sort of vocational education. So instead of a couple of, kingpin credentials, high school degree, college degree, master's, what if we had 30 degrees? And that would give clearer and more specific signals to the labor market. Do you think there's promise there? And do you think there's any way from maybe this trough of an equilibria to get over the hump to where we might get micro-credentials?
I'm not optimistic except in some very special cases. So there's some kind of very special computer skills where you might be able to get your badge for being proficient in JavaScript, and maybe you can get a job like that. Although, when I talk to people that are actually in the programming industry, usually they say, well, we're now really credentialist. Back in the 70s and 80s when the world was swimming with self-taught programmers, we were open-minded. But now that almost all the good people go to college, we are just as narrow-minded as people, as basically every other industry is. So, there's always room to try to go and shave off corners from the system and try to carve out new areas where you can go and get a good job without having the standard credentials.
Right.
But I say, the problem is we have this college for all mindset so thoroughly ingrained in us. It really is like showing up for an interview in a swimsuit to go and try to get a job without a college degree. Right. It just seems so odd. And why are you trying to weasel out of the normal path?
Right.
Right? Why can't you just go and do the normal thing like everybody else? What's wrong with you? And it's a hard question to deal with. And if you say, well, I just thought I could learn this better by doing 30 micro degrees. So if we could all simultaneously switch to a world where a lot of people are doing it, then maybe it would work. But the problem is right now, the best people generally want to do the traditional thing, and their parents certainly want them to do the traditional thing. I had a colleague who 10 years ago was really worried that we were all going to get put out of business as professors. And I firstly said, calm down, everything's going to be fine. And then I said, look, what are he said, well, online education is coming, could do to us what Napster did.
Yep.
And I said, look, what would you say 10 years from now, your son says, hey, Dad, I'm not going to go to a regular college, I'm going to go online. And he said, no son of mine's going to do that. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what all these other parents are going to say, and that's why we don't need to worry about losing our job.
Right. There's no fighting the education credential industrial complex.
Well, I'd say that there would be if there were big cuts in spending, because I think the interesting thing is like $1 trillion of government money on the side of the status quo. I think if we could just have a 10% cut.
Right.
And there is a lot of research on how responsive is college attendance to the price. And there's plenty of responsiveness.
Right.
Most of the people doing this research want to make it cheaper because they say, see, if we cut the price, more people would go. I just take this research in my book and I repurpose it and say, see, we could get the number of people who spend all these years in education down by raising the price. And the social benefit would be great because it would change the meaning of the degrees. It would mean that you could go and get a good job without a college degree. Wouldn't that be a better world than one where you need a master's degree to be a janitor?
Well, it's a compelling argument. It's a compelling book. Thanks for coming by and talking to us. And I'll have to have you back another time to talk about it.
All right, great pleasure. Thanks so much.
Rational
awesome.
Voter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is the end of our Viewpoint series with Bryan Caplan. Thanks for watching. As always, let us know what other topics you'd like AEI scholars to cover on Viewpoint. And be sure to check out the rest of our videos and research from AEI.